The clay floor beneath Zahara was stained with blood and crushed hopes. She sat curled at the edge of her sleeping mat, arms wrapped around her knees, forehead damp with sweat, and pain pressing into her back like a dull stone. The early morning light crept through the tiny window in the mud wall, painting her sorrow in colors too bright for the moment. Beside her, a thin trickle of blood ran toward the base of the wall where ants had made a line. It wasn't just blood, it was her fourth goodbye. Mama Byra, the village midwife, worked in silence. Her eyes said what her mouth would not. She'd seen too many wombs lose what they tried to hold, but none with Zahara's quiet strength. None with this kind of haunting regularity. The baby, still too small too early, lay on a folded wrap near the firewood stack. Zahara hadn't dared to look yet. "It is done," Mama Byra said softly. Her voice had no power to comfort this time. Again. Zahara didn't cry. Her eyes were dry. Her chest hollow. She only nodded. Then slowly, carefully, she leaned forward to touch her belly, now aching with the emptiness it had become so used to. Outside, the rooster crowed, followed by a hushed rustle of whispers from the compound next door. "4 times?" someone said. "It must be something dark," another answered. "She walks heavy with spirits," an older voice murmured. Zahara could hear them. The walls were thin. Pain had sharpened her hearing, made her aware of every silence and every sentence spoken too low for decency. Juma had not come. He was supposed to return before dawn. He had been away visiting his cousin in another village, or so he said. Zahara had not asked. She had learned to stop asking questions that only led to anger. He knew she was due. He knew the signs of her body by now. But he wasn't there when the bleeding started in the night. Wasn't there when she bit down on her knuckles to muffle the screams. Wasn't there when Mama Byra walked in after the neighbor called for help. Now the fire in the center of the hut crackled low, and Mama Byra folded the wrap gently over the tiny form Zahara had not yet touched. "I'll prepare the ground," she said. "No," Zahara replied, her voice scratchy like the edge of an old calabash. "I'll do it." Mama Byra looked at her as if wanting to argue. But she knew Zahara too well. Silence was sometimes the only dignity left. By late afternoon, Zahara stood in the garden behind the house. It had once been filled with okra and onions. Now it was where 3 bundles already rested. This 4th one would lie beside them, unnamed, unseen. She didn't call Juma. She didn't wait. She dug with her hands. The soil was dry and cracked, resisting every scoop as if it too refused to carry more of her loss. When she placed the small bundle in the earth, she didn't speak. Words were for beginnings, not ends. Afterward, she returned inside, washed her hands in silence, and sat by the cooking pot that hadn't held a meal since yesterday. The hunger inside her matched the emptiness of her womb, quiet, aching, deep. Juma returned just before nightfall. His shirt was stained with travel dust, his eyes tired, lips dry from the road. But he did not ask how she was. He did not run to her side. He only paused at the doorway, looking past her toward the empty mat and the still, hollow quiet of the room. "She's gone," Zahara said, not lifting her eyes. He said nothing. She waited for him to sit, to touch her hand, to say something that would make her feel like a woman again, not a cursed shadow of one. But he only leaned against the doorframe, then turned toward the gourd of water and drank in silence. Mama Byra returned later with herbs and millet, her hands worn and eyes heavier than usual. "People will talk," she said, her voice lower now, heavier. "They already are." Zahara didn't flinch. "I know. You know what comes after this, don't you?" Mama Byra asked, glancing toward the hut's dark corners. "If they fear what they don't understand, they will name it evil." Zahara nodded slowly, folding her hands over her stomach, the skin still warm where life had once stirred. She had no answers. Only grief. The next day, when she stepped out to fetch water, 2 young women walked past and crossed themselves. A group of boys playing near the fig tree paused to stare. One child whispered, "That's the one who buries babies." Zahara walked on, her spine tall. Her hands did not shake. But her heart, oh her heart, beat in fragments. By the time she reached the well, 3 women had walked away. Still, she stood, lowered her gourd, and pulled water from the earth as if she weren't drowning in whispers. That night, Juma slept on the far side of the mat, facing the wall. She watched the fire die. Watched the shadows crawl up the walls. There was no magic in her. No curse. No witchcraft. Only loss. And silence. And in that silence, Zahara began to understand. It wasn't her womb they feared, it was the truth no one dared to carry. The sun rose and set, again and again, But nothing changed for Zahara except how many eyes turned away when she entered a space. A month had passed since the fourth burial, but the whispers had not died. If anything, they had multiplied, slipping through banana trees and earthen walls like smoke that chokes without flames. Children no longer played near her hut. Their laughter now echoed in places she never walked. One afternoon, Zahara bent beside the well to draw water. She heard the sound of sandals scraping on dry ground, then the giggle of two small girls, then silence. When she looked up, she saw the girls frozen at the edge of the clearing, their buckets untouched. One of them whispered, "Don't go close, she lost 4." The other replied, "Mama said her shadow bites." They ran before Zahara could speak. Not that she would have. She no longer had the strength to explain away fear. Not when it had become so easy to spread. She began rising earlier and walking farther for water, past the mango grove and the termite mound, just to avoid the well where gossip gathered like rot at the bottom of a clay pot. Her arms ached, her legs grew tired, but her silence remained her armor. Inside the village, the stories turned sharper. When the Mbala family's goat died in the middle of the night, its eyes wide and foam at the mouth, someone muttered, "The witch's breath is heavy this season." No name was said aloud, but eyes darted toward Zahara's compound. When Mama Lele's baby developed a rash, another woman clicked her tongue and said, "Something walks past our doors when the moon is full." When food spoiled faster in one home, or when someone's husband came home angry without reason, it was as if Zahara's shadow had become the reason for all things broken. She tried to keep living, quietly, carefully. She tended her small garden. Boiled bitter leaves for her tea. Bathed at dawn before others stirred. But one morning, as she returned from collecting firewood, she passed 2 women near the path to the market. They weren't from her compound but from a neighboring ridge. "She used to be beautiful," one said softly, unaware Zahara was near. "Now her eyes look like grave water," the other replied. "No man can lie with a woman whose womb is cursed." They laughed gently. It wasn't cruel, it was casual. That's what made it worse. They didn't hate her. They simply didn't believe she belonged among them anymore. Zahara said nothing. She walked past with her bundle of firewood balanced steady on her head, even though her spine trembled beneath it. When she entered her hut, she found Juma sitting by the hearth, peeling roasted cassava. He did not look up. She knelt beside him. Not close, not touching. Just near enough to share the silence. "People are speaking things that don't belong to truth," she said quietly. He didn't answer. "Do you hear them?" she asked. Still no reply. She looked at him. His face was leaner now, his beard untrimmed. But it was his eyes, empty, dim, that frightened her more than anything the village had said. "You could say something," she whispered. "Even one word." He chewed slowly, then stood without a sound and walked out. That night, she lay awake long after the crickets stopped singing. The walls seemed to breathe around her. She felt the heaviness of the earth beneath the floor, the memory of 4 small graves tucked into its belly. Her fingers traced the edges of her blanket. She could still smell smoke from the neighbor's cooking fire, and hear the low hum of night frogs in the distance. But closer, closer still, was the weight of being alone in a place she once called home. The next day she visited Mama Byra's grave. No one else did any more. She sat cross-legged beside the raised mound, brushing away fallen leaves with her shawl. "They call me witch now," she said. The wind stirred the grass gently. She reached into her wrap and pulled out a small calabash of oil. She poured a few drops at the foot of the grave. "Why didn't you say it louder when you knew it wasn't my fault?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Back in the village, a child developed a fever. Another goat limped without cause." The talk intensified. "She shouldn't walk during market day," someone said. "Her womb eats the children of others," said another. Juma sat on his stool, carving wood, carving silence. When someone asked him at the gathering fire, "Do you believe it?" he only shrugged. That shrug burned hotter than 1,000 accusations. Zahara began to withdraw. She stopped greeting the women at dawn. Stopped attending harvest blessings. She no longer knelt to share millet at communal meals. She no longer walked to the river with a group. She was tired of pretending the stairs didn't pierce. Of watching mouths pause mid-sentence when she arrived. Isolation became her daily robe. But so did clarity. If words were poison, then she had already been bitten. But she would not let it spread. Not yet. The sky cracked open that night without thunder. Just flames. A loud shout first, then the red glow rising above the grain hut near the village square. Zahara woke to the screams and pounding footsteps. She wrapped her shawl tightly and stepped out of her hut, heart already heavy with dread. The night air was filled with smoke and the dry, bitter scent of burning millet. People rushed with buckets, pots, and even bare hands to throw sand and water onto the fire. The grain hut was old, made of thatched roof and dried reeds. It didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, the structure collapsed in a hiss of steam and black ash. No one was hurt, but food stores had been lost. Hunger would now come earlier than expected. As the crowd gathered around the smoldering ruin, someone shouted, "This is not an accident." Heads turned. Eyes searched for blame like flies looking for an open wound. Then a teenage boy, Taji the potter's son, stepped forward. His face was pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. "I saw her," he said breathless. "She walks in dreams." A woman near him gasped. "Who?" asked the elder guard. The boy pointed, slowly, almost with trembling fingers. "To her hut. Zahara." The silence that followed was louder than the fire had been. Zahara stood a few paces away, her face still lit by the dying flames. Her arms hung at her sides. She did not protest. She did not move. She simply looked at the boy, her gaze steady. "She walks in dreams," he repeated. Her shadow moved across the ground before the fire started. "I saw it." The people stared, first at Taji then at Zahara. Their fear wanted a name, and hers had been spoken. The chief arrived minutes later, carried on the back of a donkey cart. He stepped down solemnly, robes swept with ash from the chaos. He looked at the grain hut, then at the faces surrounding him. "Gather under the fig tree," he commanded. "We will not let fear make fools of us." But fear had already taken its seat at the center of the crowd. The next morning, Zahara was summoned. She washed her face with river water and wrapped herself in her cleanest lesso. She walked barefoot not from shame, but because she wanted the earth to remember that she belonged to it too. At the fig tree the whole village had gathered. Women sat on woven mats, men leaned against hoes and spears, and the children clustered behind the elders, their eyes wide with questions too big for their age. Zahara stood alone in the middle. The chief began. There was a fire. No one saw how it began. But words have been spoken. Shadows have been blamed. The crowd murmured. "We ask now, has anyone seen anything that makes them speak her name in truth?" The potter's son stepped forward again. "I swear it." Her shadow crossed the grain hut like smoke. "I wasn't dreaming." An old man cleared his throat. "I've heard dogs howl outside her door for 3 nights. Another woman added, "My child fell ill after she passed our gate." A man said, "I found a dead bird by my door. Her compound is in its line." Every voice added another thread to a tapestry of fear. They wove suspicion into certainty. No one offered proof, only stories. Stories that became ropes, tying her to something she was not. The chief raised his hand. "And what says the spirit keeper of this village?" All eyes turned to Mama Byra. She stood slowly, her back still bent but her voice as steady as ever. "There is no witch here," she said clearly. "Only sorrow. Sorrow you do not understand. So you name it evil. This woman has buried more than most of you will ever know. But fear has never respected wisdom." Someone in the crowd spat on the ground. "She's cursed. She's dangerous. She has walked too long with grief. Grief has become her god." Mama Byra tried again, louder now. "You shame your ancestors speaking this way. You shame the mothers who came before." But her voice was swallowed. Fear had grown teeth and the crowd had already begun to chew. The chief turned to Zahara. "What do you say of these words?" Zahara looked at the crowd. Looked at the chief. Looked at the fig tree whose branches stretched above her like arms refusing to hold her. She spoke slowly, her voice low and steady. "If you must blame me to feel safe, do it." Some blinked. "I did not start a fire. But you have been burning me since the day my womb could no longer give you what you expected." And no one came to throw water on those flames. A quiet murmur rolled through the crowd. The truth, bare and calm, had startled them. She looked at the boy. "You saw my shadow. But did you see me?" He opened his mouth then closed it. "Dreams lie," she said. "But fear? Fear is a very faithful storyteller." She turned to the chief. "I will not run. But I will not explain myself again." And with that she stepped back into the crowd, parting it like a windless storm. No one stopped her. But their silence didn't feel like mercy. It felt like waiting. Because in the absence of truth, fear invents its own gods, and names them after women like her. The village had quieted since the fire, but only on the surface. Beneath the daily routines, the suspicion still simmered like unspoken breath beneath a funeral cloth. Zahara walked through it all like a ghost in her own skin. She drew water alone. She harvested her small garden without help. Her husband, Juma, moved in and out of their hut like someone who had misplaced his voice somewhere far from his chest. That evening, she waited until the shadows stretched across their wall before speaking. He had returned from the shebeen, his breath warm with cheap palm wine, his shoulders heavy with something heavier than drink. "Juma," she said softly. He didn't answer, but she waited. And when he finally sat down near the doorway, she turned to face him. "Do you believe them?" Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the exhaustion of carrying unspoken wounds. Juma rubbed his face, rough with days of unshaved silence. He didn't meet her eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he muttered. "That I set fire to a hut? That I kill goats with my breath?" she asked, voice rising only slightly. He sighed. "I know you didn't. I know who you are." "Then why won't you say it out loud?" she demanded. "Why do you let them spit on my name and say nothing?" Juma looked up slowly, the weight behind his eyes finally surfacing. "Because I'm ashamed," he said. Zahara's breath caught in her throat. "Not of you," he added quickly. "Of me. Of all of this. They mock me. They say I married a grave. That I sleep beside emptiness. That my seed dies in your soil." His voice cracked, and she saw for the first time, not cruelty in his silence, but his own fear, his own shame. "They speak lies," Zahara whispered. He gave a bitter laugh. "But they say it with such confidence it starts to sound like truth." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I can't defend what I cannot fix," he muttered. "If I fight them, they'll only laugh harder." "So you leave me to fight alone?" He stood abruptly and grabbed his walking stick. "I need air." "You always need air when the fire is close," she said quietly. He didn't look back. He walked out, disappearing into the dusk like smoke dissolving into sky. That night, Zahara didn't sleep. She sat by the fire pit, watching the last flames die down. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, not for the cold, but for the loneliness. 3 days passed. Then 4. No word. No footsteps on the path. By the 5th day she stopped checking. On the 6th night, as the moon arched low in the sky, there was a knock, soft but sure. Zahara opened the door to find the village healer, Nyanya Biba, standing there. The old woman wore her usual beads and a look that had seen too much for one lifetime. "I have come late," she said, stepping inside without waiting. Zahara poured water without asking. The healer sat, took a sip, and looked at Zahara like someone appraising a seed before planting. "They never told you, did they?" she finally said. Zahara blinked. "Told me what?" "The real reason." The air thickened. "After your second loss, Mama Byra consulted me," Nyanya Biba continued. "She had seen signs, damage in the womb, something scarring from before. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't spirits. It was something that needed healing, long ago." Zahara stared at her, silent. Juma begged her not to say it aloud. He thought if people knew, they'd shame him too. Zahara swallowed hard. "So he let me carry the shame alone?" "He thought silence would protect both of you. But it only protected him," Zahara said bitterly. Nyanya Biba nodded. "That's the curse of silence. It wraps around one and strangles the other." The old woman placed a pouch of herbs on the table. "These won't fix what's broken. But they might give you strength for what comes next." "What does come next?" Zahara asked, voice hollow. "You decide," Nyanya said. "But don't wait for a man to speak what you already know." She left just before dawn. Zahara sat long after, watching the sky change colors through the cracks in her wall. She didn't cry. Her tears had long since dried into silence. But something else stirred beneath her skin. Not anger. Not yet. But a breaking away, a slow tearing of threads that had once held her in place. On the 7th day Juma returned. His clothes were dirty. His face was lined. He smelled like sweat and regret. Zahara didn't stand to greet him. He sat near the fire, avoiding her gaze. "I went to my brother's place," he said flatly. She said nothing. "I drank too much. I thought too much. I came back." Still she didn't respond. "I'm tired of this," he finally said. "Of all of it." Zahara turned to him, her eyes clear, her voice steady. "Then speak. Say the truth. Say what you let them believe." He opened his mouth. But only air came out. She stood, walked past him, and stepped outside into the open morning. Sometimes a man's silence cuts deeper than a blade. Not because it holds truth, but because it hides the one thing that might have saved her. His voice, spoken loud, standing beside her. But it had never come. And she could not wait for it anymore. The memories came without permission, like a knock in the night from a visitor long buried in the mind. Zahara sat by the fire, stirring a pot of porridge that no longer carried sweetness, and her thoughts drifted backward. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't nostalgia. It was the body remembering what the heart had tried to forget. Years earlier, Zahara had nearly died from a fever that burned for 3 days and 3 nights. It began after a rainy season flood that muddied the village well. Many had fallen sick, but Zahara had been the worst. She had vomited blood, her stomach twisting with cramps so severe she could not stand. Her eyes had turned glassy. Juma had carried her to Mama Byra's hut wrapped in his own shawl, his hands shaking as if they knew what the heart feared. Mama Byra, the old midwife and healer, had worked tirelessly, rubbing bitter oils into Zahara's skin, pressing cooling herbs under her tongue, whispering prayers to spirits Zahara couldn't hear through the fog of sickness. On the second night, her breath had nearly stopped. On the third, her eyes had opened slowly, like the petals of a flower uncertain of the sun. "You came back," Mama Byra had whispered, relief softening her tired features. "But not all of you." Zahara hadn't understood then. She only wanted water. She only wanted the pain to end. After a week, she returned home, thinner, slower, her body no longer hers. It was Juma who had gone to Mama Byra again a few weeks later. Zahara never knew what they spoke of that day, only that Juma returned different. He didn't touch her for months, and when he finally did, he was gentler, quieter, but not in love, more like a man afraid to stir something broken. Mama Byra had seen something during the illness. She knew the infection had traveled too far, into places no poultice could reach. Her experienced hands had recognized the scarring deep within Zahara's womb. Not just surface damage, but the kind that meant difficulty, loss, perhaps permanence. But she had said nothing to Zahara. She'd only told Juma behind the closed reed curtain of her hut. "It may not heal," she had told him. "It may never carry past the first moons." Juma had clenched his jaw. "Don't say this." "I must." "She doesn't need to know," he said firmly. "Not if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong." "She'll blame herself," Juma said, voice cracking. "Or worse, they'll blame her." Mama Byra had paused. "Then you must carry the silence with her." "I will." And he had. But silence has weight. And lies, especially ones told to protect, grow roots that twist around the soul. Over the years, Mama Byra tried what she could. She made steaming herbal baths, teas thick with crushed bark and root. She pressed Zahara's belly and listened to its silent refusals. After the second miscarriage, she had taken Juma aside. "It's not evil," she said. "It's not spirits. It's not her fault." He only nodded, eyes cast down. "You should tell her." "I can't," he replied. "I can barely tell myself." Mama Byra had watched the couple grow more distant after each loss. She had watched Zahara's smile shrink into politeness, watched Juma's hands become still even when he pretended to be working. The weight of their silence hovered like a mist. After the third miscarriage, Mama Byra had looked older than she ever had. Her hands, once steady, began to shake when mixing herbs. She knew time was growing short, for Zahara, for the marriage, for herself. Then came the fourth. She had rushed to Zahara's hut the moment the neighbor's child ran screaming for help. Her heart had already known. When she saw the blood, the way Zahara sat staring into the distance, her heart broke, not from surprise but from confirmation. That night, she returned to her own home and sat by the fire, refusing food. She took out the bundle of notes she had written about Zahara's treatments, her condition, her prognosis. She set them aside and said, "There is too much truth and not enough courage." 3 nights later, Mama Byra died in her sleep. No one expected it. The village mourned. People came with gourds of honey and calabashes of milk. The healer was buried with chants and praise, but also confusion. She had not been ill. She had not spoken of death. Zahara cried, quiet tears at the edge of the burial. Juma stood beside her, stiff and unreadable. But what no one buried with Mama Byra was the truth, because it had already been buried long before her final breath. The truth had been silenced the moment Juma asked it to be, wrapped in the soft cloth of protection and secrecy. And now that truth festered in every whisper, every accusation, every sidelong glance Zahara endured. In her hut, Zahara stared into the fire, her thoughts unraveling the years. She remembered the way Juma's hands had trembled that night after her illness. She remembered the way Mama Byra used to press her lower belly with such sadness. She remembered the words she never heard, but had always felt around her, like a curtain between her and understanding. Now it made sense. The healer's sudden visits. The endless herbs that never worked. Juma's silence each time they lost a child. It was never a curse. It was never witchcraft. It was a wound, a physical one. Hidden too deep for eyes but visible to those who dared to look. Zahara placed her hand on her stomach. The place that had become a graveyard without markers. She whispered aloud for the first time, "Why didn't you tell me?" But the answer had been buried with the woman who might have spoken it. A silence meant to protect her had become the very blade that tore her apart. She now knew the truth. But truth too late is not truth, it is shadow. And that shadow had now stretched across the whole village. The day of Mama Byra's burial arrived with no wind. The air sat still, like it too was waiting for someone to speak what had been left unsaid. Women moved through the healer's hut with slow reverence, their hands wet with wash water and their lips sealed by memory. Zahara stood among them, the youngest, the quietest, and the one who knew, without knowing, what weight this death truly carried. She helped lift Mama Byra's frail body onto the mat of woven reeds, her hands trembling only once, when she wiped behind the old woman's ears. She whispered a soft prayer as she folded the shawl over her chest. Not the kind the others spoke for public mercy, but a private farewell meant only for those who had shared silence with her. "Why didn't you tell me everything?" Zahara whispered through her teeth, as she gently rubbed oil into Mama Byra's dry feet. "You helped me, but you didn't save me. You knew what I didn't." The other women sang around her, low, long notes about safe journeys and ancestors who wait with open arms. But Zahara's voice remained inside her throat. She was not yet ready to let it go. They carried Mama Byra through the village, the men holding the poles of the burial mat, the women singing behind. Children watched from windows, unsure how to grieve for someone who had frightened them with bitter herbs and stories of old spirits, but who had, nonetheless, brought every one of them into this world. The burial site was simple, beside the tall tree near the edge of the banana grove. There were no extravagant markings. Just soil, a mound, and the memory of hands that had once pulled life from the brink of death. People wept, yes, but for many it was a weeping of guilt. The ones who had doubted her medicine. The ones who had come too late when the fever was already too high. The ones who had forgotten she was old. Zahara was the only one who cried from a place deeper than memory. Her tears were not for duty or custom. They were for the woman who had held her hand through 4 small deaths. For the one person who had known the truth and kept it to herself, wrapped in silence and camphor leaves. After the crowd dispersed, Zahara lingered. She sat near the fresh soil and picked absently at a blade of grass, not to pass time, but to hold on to it. She whispered one last thing. "I would have forgiven you, if you had just let me carry it with you." By dusk, she returned to Mama Byra's compound, now abandoned except for the chickens pecking quietly in the dust. Most of the healer's belongings had been taken. Her jars, her mortar, her stool. The hut looked smaller now, empty of the life that once filled it. As Zahara turned to leave, something caught her eye behind the chicken coop, something wedged between a hollow log and the base of the wall. A satchel. The leather was cracked and stiff, its strap worn thin from years of use. She picked it up and felt the soft clink of dried herbs inside. Zahara knelt and opened it carefully. Bundles of mugwort. A pouch of dried neem leaves. A sliver of carved bone from an animal she could not name. Tucked into the folds was a piece of folded cloth, stiff with age. And inside that cloth, a letter. Zahara's name was written on the front in faded charcoal. Her hands shook as she opened it. The writing was uneven, some of it smudged by what looked like water, or tears. "Zahara," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have already crossed. I wanted to tell you, but I waited too long and I feared too much. What I saw in your body was a wound deeper than healing. Not from the spirits. Not from curses. But from that fever long ago. It left marks inside you where no eye can see. You were never meant to carry all the blame. I should have spoken." Zahara pressed the letter to her chest. The wind still hadn't moved. But something inside her had. "What we bury sometimes tries to rise again," the healer's letter read. "And not every grave is made of soil." Zahara looked toward the burial site in the distance, then back at the letter. The truth had not died with Mama Byra. It had waited, hidden behind the coop, wrapped in dry herbs and soft shame. Now it belonged to Zahara. And she would not bury it again. Zahara waited until the hut was empty, until even the goats had quieted and the wind had curled into stillness, before she opened the letter again. She'd read it twice already, but something inside her begged to read it once more, not for information but for confirmation. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she already knew but hadn't dared to name. The paper crackled as she unfolded it, and Mama Byra's familiar script stared back, Crooked lines, firm in some places, hesitant in others. Zahara, it began again. You have suffered too much in silence. I write this not because I am brave but because I am running out of time. You deserve to know the truth that was taken from you. Zahara swallowed. After your illness, the fever that nearly took you from us, I examined you more than once. I found the scarring early. Your womb lining, it was thinned and torn in places where it should have been soft. I feared it would never hold a child long. I hoped I was wrong. She paused, her chest tightening. I called a traveling herbal doctor from the southern valley. Discreet. Trusted. He confirmed what I feared. It wasn't spirits. It wasn't curses. It was the infection. Your womb could not carry to term, not without risk. Not without deep healing I could not give. Zahara clenched the letter. Her breath came short and sharp. I wanted to tell you. But Juma begged me not to. He said it would break you, shame you, ruin your hope. He said you would live happier believing it was bad luck, or a test. He asked me to protect you with silence. I agreed. I thought it was mercy. Her eyes filled but no tears fell yet. But mercy and truth are not the same. I should have spoken. I should have stood beside you. I'm sorry, my daughter. So sorry. There were 2 final lines, smudged and faded. A lie told in love is still a lie. But truth buried, it always fights to rise. The paper fell to her lap. Zahara sat frozen for a long time, the fire beside her burning low, casting orange shadows on the cracked wall. Outside, the village carried on, unaware that a heart was breaking, not from sorrow but from clarity. It had never been her fault. Not the whispers. Not the miscarriages. Not the shame. It was never witchcraft. It was never the ancestors turning away. It was not punishment. It was biology. A wound unseen. An infection that had passed, leaving scars behind like fingerprints on glass that no one had ever cleaned away. And Juma knew. All these years, all these funerals of the unborn, all those quiet nights where she sat beside his silence and begged for reassurance he refused to give, he had known. He had let the village spit her name into the dust. He had let her doubt her own goodness. He had walked away from her at every funeral not because he was broken, but because he was hiding. Zahara folded the letter carefully. She did not tremble now. Her hands had found new strength. She stood, walked outside into the cool night, and looked at the satchel lying where she had left it, beside the wall. The same satchel that had once cradled medicine, secrets, and shame. She picked it up. The leather was brittle, the flap stiff with years of sweat and dust. She opened it and pulled out each herb pouch one by one. Mugwort, neem, wild clove. She laid them in the fire pit like dry petals. Then the sliver of carved bone. Then the cloth wrapping. Last the satchel itself. She held it to her chest for a moment, not as gratitude but as farewell. It had carried too many things that should have been said aloud. Then she placed it in the fire. The flames took it quickly. The leather curled, hissed, darkened. Smoke lifted, not high, not dramatic, just enough to take what was no longer hers to carry. She watched it burn until it was ash. But the letter she kept. Wrapped it in clean cloth. Tucked it into her trunk beneath the loose board. It was not forgiveness yet. But it was ownership. That night, Zahara did not sleep. She sat upright, her hands folded in her lap, the fire low beside her. Not because she was afraid. Because she had finally seen the truth, and it looked nothing like the shadows they had painted her with. Grief turned slowly into something else. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just a stillness sharpened by truth. She would no longer beg for belief. She would no longer explain herself to fear. They had named her witch because they were too frightened to say scar. But the truth had survived, in a healer's shaking hand, in ink now faded, in a satchel tucked behind a chicken coop. Truth buried is still truth. And tonight it had surfaced. The sky had threatened rain for days, teasing the parched earth with swollen clouds that passed without release. The village walked with brittle movements, dust clinging to the hems of skirts and the skin beneath fingernails. Even the goats had stopped bleeding. But on the morning Zahara woke with the letter pressed beneath her palm, the first drop fell. It landed on her roof like a knock. Then another. And another. By midday the sky broke open. Rain came down in sheets, pounding the soil, washing the brown from the leaves, stirring the scent of earth and old regret. Children screamed with delight. Women opened jars to catch the water. Old men raised their faces and whispered prayers. Zahara stepped outside, her head bare, her wrapper soaked in moments. But she did not run for cover. She stood in the open, arms loose by her side, the rain sliding down her face like a baptism no one had asked for, but one she now claimed. Then she moved. She didn't call out. She didn't ring a bell. She simply walked. Past the well. Past the grain huts. Past the homes of women who had once turned their backs. They saw her wet dress clinging to her bones, her hair tight against her scalp, and they followed. By the time she reached the old fig tree, 20 women stood behind her. Mama Tunu, the chief's wife, the market vendors, even little girls who had once been told not to look her in the eye. And slowly the men gathered too, curious, cautious, suspicious. Juma lingered at the edge, uncertain if he was welcome in the storm that now stirred not just the sky, but the soil beneath their feet. Zahara stood beneath the wide fig tree, leaves trembling with each drop. The air held its breath. She pulled the letter from inside her wrap. The paper was dry, sheltered in plastic since the night she rescued it. She unfolded it slowly. No one moved. "I have something to read," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, like the first breeze before thunder. "It is from Mama Byra." A murmur rippled through the women. "She left it for me. After she died. After my 4th child slipped away." She paused. No one interrupted. Then she began to read. Word for word. Mama Byra's script, brought to life by Zahara's voice. The fever. The internal scarring. The traveling herbal doctor. The confirmation. The choice Juma made. No embellishments. No trembling. Just truth, raw and deliberate. By the end, the rain had softened to a mist. Zahara looked up. Women covered their mouths. Some wept. Others stood still, eyes wide with horror, not at her but at themselves. "You feared me because I lost," Zahara said. "You feared me because you didn't understand." She let that sit a moment. "You called me a witch. You let your children run from me. You let your goats die in the night and pointed at my shadow." The fig leaves rustled above. "But it wasn't spirits that hurt me," she said, her voice tightening. "It was the silence of your sons. Your husbands. Your brothers. The men who hid the truth. The men who told the healer to bury what should have been spoken." Zahara turned her eyes toward Juma. He looked smaller than he had ever been, soaked through, staring at his feet, jaw trembling. Not from cold. From shame. She didn't point at him. She didn't raise her voice. Her power didn't need volume. "This letter was not written to shame," she said. "But truth has a way of rising. Even when it's been buried. Even when it dies with the body, it returns." A gust of wind swept through the fig tree, sending down a flurry of drops that scattered across their heads like anointing. Mama Tunu stepped forward first. Her eyes were wet. "I believed the stories," she said softly. "I was wrong." Others nodded. A young woman Zahara didn't recognize, a new bride, whispered, "I'm sorry." Zahara let their words wash over her, but she didn't drink them in. She hadn't spoken for apologies. She had spoken because her silence had carried enough weight to fill 4 graves. Now the sky had opened. The earth had softened. And the truth had returned to its rightful place, in the mouth of the woman they once feared. Zahara stepped back. She folded the letter, placed it in the fold of her wrapper, and walked away, bare feet splashing through the puddles as the fig leaves danced behind her. Juma watched her pass. But this time she did not look back. The morning after the rain, Zahara swept the front of her hut slowly, the broom stirring the soft, damp earth in small, deliberate strokes. Everything smelled clean, washed, as if even the stones had been rinsed of their secrets. She wasn't waiting, but they came. The first was Mama Tunu walking barefoot, her wrapper tied high above her ankles. She held a small calabash of milk in both hands, head bowed low. "For the strength we mistook for danger," she said softly. "May this sweeten the tongue of your name." Zahara took the calabash and placed it beside the door. She nodded, not with warmth or coldness but with peace. That was enough. Then came Naima, who had once whispered to her child to cross the road when Zahara passed. She brought firewood, dry and stacked with care. "For warmth you were denied," she said. By midday there were bracelets woven from reeds, pouches of salt, smoked fish wrapped in banana leaves, pieces of cloth dyed in patterns Zahara had once admired in passing but could never afford. None of them asked to be forgiven. None of them tried to explain. They simply brought what their hands could carry. And Zahara, quiet and upright, received them all with the same grace that had carried her through their scorn. She thanked each one, sometimes with a glance, sometimes with a word. But she made no performance of mercy. This was not theater. It was healing. Slow. Quiet. Earned. Later that afternoon a small girl, no more than 10, approached her shyly, clutching a wildflower and a leaf. Is this good for fever? She asked, eyes wide. Zahara looked at the leaf, crumbled a bit of it between her fingers, smelled the edge. Not fever, she said. But good for belly cramps. The girl's eyes sparkled. Will you teach me? Zahara nodded once. A single lesson. A beginning. By evening, a small group of women sat under the shade tree near Zahara's hut, some with notebooks, others with just open hands and ears. They didn't ask her to become what Mama Byra was. They didn't call her healer or seer. They simply listened as she spoke about roots that soothe, oils that calm, seeds that cleanse. She spoke gently, but she did not hold back. This is not only for sickness, she said. This is for dignity. As twilight settled, Juma came. His feet were bare, his wrapper muddy. His eyes were hollowed out by sleepless nights, and his beard had grown ragged at the edges. He walked slowly, like a man unsure if the ground would allow his steps. When he reached her door, he knelt. Not to beg, but because he could no longer stand under the weight he had carried. He didn't say her name. Just, I was wrong. Zahara looked at him for a long moment. He did not look up. I thought shame would protect us, he continued, voice hoarse. I thought silence would keep the village from pitying me, from blaming me. He pressed his forehead into the soil. But you carried the shame alone. And I. He choked on the next words. Zahara watched. Listen. Then softly she spoke. Truth must earn its place. He looked up, startled. Not just arrive, she added. It must earn its place. She did not tell him to rise. She did not offer forgiveness. But she did not turn him away. He nodded slowly, eyes red, knowing this was not a door, but a gate. And gates open only for those willing to till the ground they once cursed. That night, Zahara lit a new fire in the back of her compound. Not for warmth. Not for cooking. But for the women who would soon return again. Not as givers of gifts, but as learners, as builders, as those who had once destroyed and now came to grow. She called it the Circle of Return. A place for women who had lost. Women who had been silenced. Women who had bled and been blamed. They sat together. They told stories not meant for public ears, only for those who knew the ache of being called evil when you were only broken. Zahara never claimed the title of healer. She let others call her what they chose. But deep in her chest she knew her role. Not to diagnose. Not to save. But to stand. To be the proof that truth could survive fire, silence, exile, and still rise. The next morning the girl with the flower came again, this time with 3 friends. They knelt as Zahara poured oil into a carved gourd. Today, Zahara said, smiling softly, you learn how to touch without fear. And they did. The curse was reversed, not by spell, not by miracle, but by truth spoken under rain, dignity held without apology, and a woman who stood where others had knelt. Years passed like soft winds through tall grass, quiet, steady, never pausing to ask if Zahara was ready for their passing. She aged gently, without bitterness. The hut was fuller now, stocked with jars of dried leaves, rows of stones shaped smooth from grinding, and scrolls tied with twine in careful bundles. Her circle of women grew. They no longer called her the cursed one. Now they brought their daughters to sit in the dust and listen. Zahara had not borne another child. Her body had healed in ways the village could not see, ways that needed no womb to measure her worth. She did not seek company. But as life often does when no one is asking, it brought someone anyway. It happened after the fever swept through the lowlands, a fierce illness that took breath before names could be remembered. One day, as the morning mist lifted and dew still clung to the edges of her herbs, Zahara stepped outside and saw a girl curled beneath the neem tree at the edge of her compound. Thin, silent, eyes too large for her face. Zahara approached carefully. The girl didn't flinch. Who brought you? She asked. The girl just blinked, dust caked around her nostrils, legs curled tight under her. Zahara knelt beside her, reached for her wrist, and felt the weak but present pulse. No amulets. No scars. Just abandonment and silence. The girl had survived, but just barely. Zahara brought her in. Bathed her in warmed water. Fed her spoonfuls of mashed pumpkin and broth. On the 3rd day the girl spoke. My name was Wanza. Zahara placed a hand over her own heart. Now you are Tumaini, she said. The girl stared. It means hope, Zahara explained. And that's what you are. From then on, Tumaini stayed. She followed Zahara like shadow to sun, copying how she sorted leaves, how she measured crushed roots, how she rubbed oil into aching joints. She learned to read the stars, not to predict fortunes but to know when to plant and when to rest. When storms were coming, Temani could feel it in her knees before the sky even darkened. She listened to every lesson Zahara offered, but more than that, she watched. Watched how Zahara never raised her voice to the sky, never blamed the past, never flinched when someone whispered about who she had once been. One afternoon, as they sat weaving reed baskets for storing herbs, Temani looked up from her lap, her small fingers pausing over the dried stalks. "Why don't I have your eyes?" Zahara looked at her, surprised by the question's softness. The girl's tone held no sadness, only wonder. Zahara smiled. "Because not all children come from the womb," she said. "Some are born from fire." Temani tilted her head, listening. Zahara set the basket down and reached for her hand. "Some children are carried in the arms of grief. Some are shaped by silence, like clay beneath rain. Some, like you, are born from truth." Temani blinked, her lashes trembling. "You are not mine by blood. But you are mine by everything else." A smile broke across the girl's face, small, shy, but full of the kind of light that turns huts into homes. From that day she called Zahara Mama. And Zahara, for the first time, accepted the title without hesitation. Together they built more than a life. They built a space where girls who had lost could come and be found. Where women who had been broken could sit in stillness and remember they were whole. Where truth was not feared but welcomed. Temani helped write down Zahara's knowledge, scratching lines into leather-bound journals with charcoal and steady fingers. She illustrated herbs, drew maps of the moon's cycle, documented how different roots cured different griefs. And every so often, a woman would come to the compound, holding a child's hand or a basket of sorrow, and say, "Do you remember me?" Zahara always did. She never turned them away. One night, as the stars stretched wide across the sky and the fire burned low, Temani rested her head in Zahara's lap. "Do you ever wish you had a baby from your own belly?" she asked quietly. Zahara looked up at the sky, at the constellations she had once studied for signs, now just stories she told at night. "No," she said gently. "I wanted a child I could pass myself into. And here you are." Temani closed her eyes and smiled. Zahara stroked her hair, her fingers weaving through the strands like she once wove medicine through suffering. No ache remained in her voice. No longing. Only peace. She had not failed as a woman. She had not been cursed. She had not been barren. She had simply waited for the kind of child that could only be born through fire. And now she was home. They called her a witch because they couldn't call out their own fear. Because what they didn't understand they turned into a curse. But Zahara was never the witch. She was the flame they tried to snuff out with silence. Truth does not die quietly. It waits. And when it rises with eyes wide open, carrying letters no one expected to read. May every woman who has suffered in shame know this. Your pain is not your curse, it is the soil where your power will grow.